One of the most pervasive and disturbing features of modern contemporary political rhetoric is the seeming omnipresence today of double standards. These double standards we see glaringly on the left, and they concern pretty much all the critical issues that we deal with today. Here are a few examples. From the left's point of view, military presence in Washington, D.C. used to be very bad when Trump did it. Now, for the inauguration, it's become very good. Suddenly, we see all these fences popping up all over the Capitol. So the old mantra used to be, walls don't work. Suddenly, walls do work. They're amazing. It used to be, for the left, that lockdowns were absolutely necessary because the virus is out of control. And we have to take severe measures because this is a global pandemic, you know, Dinesh. Now, suddenly, in the upcoming Biden era, it's time to start opening things up. We can't keep things locked down forever. Sure, we've got to find ways to live with the virus, you know. Violence. Violence used to be permissible. What violence? There's only a very moderate amount of violence going on here. These are mostly peaceful protests. What's a little violence to spice things up? Now, with the takeover of the Capitol, violence is unacceptable. Violence is insurgency. Round up the violent people right away, even if they're just a few people. Let's go get them. Riots. From the left's point of view, when BLM and Antifa were doing it, riots are the language of the unheard. Now suddenly, riots are a form of domestic terrorism. And finally, cops. It used to be that cops are bad. Not just this cop or that cop, all cops. Defund the police. Now suddenly, with the police involvement in the Capitol Hill takeover, suddenly, honor our men and women in blue. Now, how can any intelligent person fail to see the shocking hypocrisy, the shocking double standards here? But it makes us think a little bit more about double standards themselves, because normally when you see a double standard, if you scrutinize it carefully, there's a single standard hiding behind it, a single standard that doesn't want to be confessed or acknowledged. Here's an example. This is a tweet from the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. There's a distinct difference between criminal doxing, a common tactic of white supremacists and others, and the important reporting of extremists and hateful activity. Our laws must clearly reflect that. So basically what the ADL is saying is, it's okay to dox some people, but not other people. It's okay to dox extremists, but we who are fighting extremists should be able to dox people and report on them. Now, of course, the key word here is extremists, and the key word also is who gets to say, who gets to define the word extremists. And so you notice that when people apply this sort of dual measure, if you will, what they always do is modify language to create prejudice. And so, for example, the BLM and Antifa activity is a protest, whereas the storming of the Capitol is a storming. It's an insurgency. It's terrorism. It's domestic terrorism. It's like ISIS. So by using soft words in one context and the most severe words, exaggerated words, ridiculous words in the other, you're able to show why this supposed double standard becomes defensible, why it's okay to overlook the one and prosecute the other. Now, the never-Trumper, or sort of never-Trumper, Jonah Goldberg, has a series of very interesting tweets in which he talks about the fact that conservatives should, in his view, not be indignant about liberal double standards. And Jonah lays this out as a kind of a rant, but I think it's worth considering because he's a thoughtful guy. Actually, my former colleague at the American Enterprise Institute, I remember Jonah, actually coming to DC as a student right out of Goucher College. When he first came to AEI, he was basically running the coffee machine and the copier. But he went on to write an important book, Liberal Fascism, and now he's the editor of a website, and he's also kind of a commentator from the anti-Trump angle or point of view. And so Jonah's argument is this. Basically, he says that conservatives should be the people of higher standards. Let's not say that because the left did it, therefore we should be able to do it. Let's not hold ourselves to their standard. Why let them define us? If they do violence, why shouldn't we do something nobler? Jonah says, quote, I'm not an expert on Christianity, but he implies, well, why shouldn't we turn the other cheek? Conservatism, he says, ultimately is about right and wrong. Our standards are not relativist, and so they shouldn't be defined by the other side. And he gives a telling example. He says, if my daughter, his daughter, is shoplifting, he as a parent would consider it no defense if his daughter were then to say, Dad, all my friends were shoplifting too, and nothing happened to them. Jonah's point is it doesn't matter if nothing happened to them. You shoplifted, and something should happen to you. So this is Jonah's argument, which I want to now probe. First of all, let's start with the shoplifting analogy. I think it's a bogus analogy for two reasons. First of all, this is not a case where conservatives are saying, in effect, that we want our daughters to get away with shoplifting. We're not saying that. In fact, I don't know a single leading conservative or Trumpster who has argued that the people who illegally occupied the Capitol should not face penalties. Now, they should face penalties proportional to what their intention was and what they did, but they should be held accountable. I don't know anyone who is not saying that on our side. So, it is not unreasonable then to say, just to modify Jonah's analogy somewhat further, if my daughter were shoplifting or his daughter were shoplifting, and they were hauled up on charges, and then they were accused not of being shoplifters, but domestic terrorists, and someone wanted to prevent them from going to college ever or getting a job ever, wanted to lock them up, let's just say for 10 years, wanted to classify them as domestic terrorists and not let your daughter, Jonah, or mine, fly on an airplane. And at the same time, the people doing this were condoning vast numbers of people for doing much worse and getting completely away with it. Not only were those people not being held to prosecution, they were being praised for what they did. And what they did was much worse. I bet you would be outraged as a parent, and rightly so. Why? Because justice isn't just a matter of being penalized. You should be penalized proportional to what you did. You should be penalized in such a way that other people who did the same thing are also held accountable. Otherwise, the whole concept of equal rights under the law and equal standard of justice, the very meaning of the equality provision of the 14th Amendment, totally collapses. But here's a deeper reason why I think the analogy is flawed, and that is, this is not a case of a bunch of people shoplifting together. This is more like a fight in which we step into the ring against an adversary, and we are fighting according to the rules of boxing, and suddenly they kick us in the face. In other words, they go MMA. They use mixed martial arts. Now, we then say, wait a minute, this is unfair. You're changing the rules of the game. You're applying one set of rules to yourself in which you're allowed to do more violent things, more lawless things, and we are supposed to do nothing in return, play by the rules of the game. Well, obviously, if we accept that standard, we would lose most, if not all, our fights. So Jonah's counsel of virtue is actually a counsel of defeat. It's a guarantee for our side to lose all our fights.